Well, welcome to another episode of Beyond the Youth Room podcast. My name is Keith. This is Ryne over here, and we have a special guest, Don from South Africa. And we're here to talk today just about some of the obstacles that we face in global gospel advancing ministry. So he's experiencing a lot of different oppositions and obstacles that might be even different than our American efforts in gospel advancing movement. And so we're talking about the differences of obstacles and just basically just wanted to get to know some of your ministry, Don, and what's happening in Africa, how we can pray for you as brothers in Christ and supporters of your ministry. So before we get into the episode, I want to just mention that we are sponsored by Edge Club, and you can head over to edgeclub.org to get a free training on how to launch clubs in public middle school and high schools in your area. We really love to see students mobilized on their public school campus. We teach them how to share the gospel. We teach them how to have urgency with sharing the gospel, and then also give them a strategy on how to launch a club that's evangelistic in nature in their public middle and high school. So head over to edgeclub.org for that. Now, for today's episode, I mentioned that we're going to be talking about just some of the differences between what's happening in Africa with the gospel advancing movement among teenagers and the next generation. We know that Africa has an average age of 19. You said it was 1.4 billion?
Yeah, on the African
1.4 billion people in Africa, and the average age is 19. So we have a lot of young people, and so of course, we're in youth ministry. We're trying to mobilize students. And so what have been some of the challenges that you faced in more recent years as you've been really hitting the ground running with gospel advancing movement there?
Well, thanks again, Keith, to be part of the episode, and Ryan, thanks for just allowing me to be a part of this. So in South Africa, we've got, and I'm talking, we look at Africa and we look at South Africa, different challenges and obstacles that we face. One of the biggest obstacles and challenges is many people don't actually know what the clear gospel is. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like there's lies coming in that, the gospel, if you believe in the gospel, everything will go well for you and you'll be rich and famous.
Yeah,
and
so
there's
prosperity
gospel. Mm-hmm. And so there's different understandings of what the gospel is, and what that looks like in Africa. And I know in the United States, obviously you've got different challenges, but for us, also another challenge is for youth pastors to buy into gospel advancing and what that looks like. It's there are different guys who if it's not their idea or it doesn't come from their church, they can't be a part of it. And so they become very resistant to that. So those are some of the biggest challenges that we faced or that we're facing thus far.
Yeah. And so I know, Ryan, you had some questions as well that I'll just kind of pick Don's brain while we have him in the States here. So
I've got lots of questions. So many. But no, I think it's interesting that you said that about almost the competitive nature of church. That's definitely not something that's limited to South Africa. I think sadly that's in our culture as well. But I think when you look at the different perspectives, right, and it's interesting with the age of the internet and all these things, we're not as disconnected as we once were, but it's still, very different, I'm sure, in most ways. So being somebody who's been in both America and South Africa, what would you say are maybe the similarities, the differences between specifically the culture that students are facing in America versus South Africa? Maybe some ways that, it's similar across the board, but maybe also some differences that you have a different perspective on.
And if you allow me to be totally honest, I'll definitely give it to you.
Yeah.
So what the struggles that I'm seeing that you guys face here in America is very different to some of the struggles in South Africa. So I'll give you an example, quite a big one that you guys are facing, and it's at the forefront of what you guys are facing is the LGBT and the gender community. You guys are facing those issues and asking questions about that. You're asking many questions in your youth room, in your churches. In South Africa, that is not a big issue at all. Our challenges are more socioeconomic. Like young people are thinking about, some of the young, I'll give you an example. A young person who goes to school, wakes up at 5 o'clock in the morning. They obviously bathe themselves in a shack. You know, they've got a little tub. They wash themselves. They get on a taxi. They catch a ride, maybe 30 minutes, 40 minutes, one way to a school. And also, most of them, they come from single-parent homes. And so then they go to school, school fees aren't paid. You know, there's those worries. Some of them don't have lunch at school. And so I'm just giving you an example of like the differences of, and that's not all over South Africa, but in the majority of the past, that's the reality of young people. So like in terms of like what we're facing at the moment, those are some of the sort of the glaring issues that I see in the States, you know, and South Africa. Yeah.
In fact, you kind of had a real example of that when you just came to visit here on the Metro. We didn't tell you about this, Ryan, but yeah, you want to share your experience of...
So I enjoy visiting the capital, and it's awesome. You know, as a movement leader, I'm here visiting friends like you guys, and just also building relationship to further the movement in South Africa and Africa. But as I was on the train, I thought I'd go down to Washington, D.C., start my trip off by praying in the capital. But I caught the Silver Line from the airport to the capital, and as I was sitting there, I think it's about a 45-minute ride. So I sat there and I saw this guy doing his makeup. So it's not normal for me to see this, okay?
Yeah.
So I was sitting there watching this guy, and I thought maybe he's going to a show, or like he's an actor or something. But he transformed over the 45 minutes from a guy to a girl. And then he actually came and spoke to me and asked if this is one of the stations, and I was like, no, sorry, man. Sorry, ma'am. Sorry. I don't know what. You know,
Yeah.
so that's the reality. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't see that in South Africa. You know.
Yeah, and that's definitely one of the things that, one of the obstacles that we're discussing is as far as, we were just asked yesterday at a gathering that someone came up to me and was like, what are some of the challenges of sharing the gospel to this next generation here in America? And as I thought about it, it wasn't like too hard to come up with. So one of them, I think, is that identity issue.
Yeah.
So like we have such an identity crisis where, students are wrestling with some really heavy seeming like decisions that they feel like they have to make. Like, what gender will I be? And, who will I be attracted to? Like, what gender will I be attracted to? Or am I pansexual or asexual or bisexual or homosexual or, heterosexual? Like all these different aspects. Gender fluidity, where they're changing back and forth, between genders. And it's a very confusing time identity-wise. And we were talking about this last night even too, about how, some of these, identity sins or like even sexual sins are so rooted in their identity that it's unlike other sin struggles that we may face, where, we don't come out to our parents as a liar. We don't say like, hey guys, I need to tell you something, like I'm a liar. We don't go to liars parades, like we don't like celebrate the fact that we're liars and that it's part of who we are and that we can't change.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a blending of moral decisions and identity in such a way that's hard to separate them for teenagers so that's a huge obstacle for the gospel, because they're so consumed with determining their identity right now. And of course, one way that we combat that, one way that we do that is give them a taste of true identity in Christ. Like we want to show them who they are, like show them that they're made in God's image, that they're reflecting His image, that they have a purpose, and that they have a plan and a relationship opportunity with their Creator. And then once they taste that, everything else that the world has to offer is insignificant. So we really believe that the gospel is the answer to that. But the second thing, even in the obstacles, is the urgency of the gospel and the way that we present the gospel. It can be challenging when you have, when we share the gospel in such a way that it's only about heaven or hell. It's only about what happens after we die on earth. And teenagers are the most aware of death, but think they're the furthest from it, which statistically they probably are. They're most teenagers will live into adulthood. There's some that die young or whatever, but in reality, they feel like they don't have to decide where they stand with Christ until they're closer to death, if we present the gospel as heaven or hell. And so, so with that aspect, there's a huge barrier there. And then, of course, like we know, some of the things that we're talking about that's not as big of a struggle in South Africa as well is like the moral relativism. Like absolute truth is observable in math. 2 + 2 = 4. But what if I say 2 + 2 = 5? Well, then you're wrong. Well, why can't we translate some of that absolute truth into spiritual truth? Where spiritual truth is moral, like our moral relativism, like it's just relevant to who you are. Well, that's good for you, but it's just not good for me. And it's like, well, if it's true, it's true, And same thing with gravity. Like there's natural laws in our universe that are true whether we believe in them or not. The speed limit, whether we know the speed limit or not, we're still held accountable to that speed limit by being pulled over by a police officer, right? So with that, I think those are some of the obstacles that we face in the American culture with teenagers sharing the gospel that might be unique to Western culture, as we were talking about. But what are some of the other questions that you had, Ryan?
Well, kind of along those lines, I think it's I personally have never really traveled outside the country. When I was a kid, I did, but as an adult, I haven't really traveled outside the country. So I know that limits my perspective on, in Revelation, it talks about all nations, tribes, and tongues, together in heaven. And I've talked to a lot of people about that. So how does, kind of maybe even cross-cultural too, but how does kind of seeing those different cultures and different nations, how's that impacted your perspective on the gospel and the way maybe you see the kingdom of God?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was going to also say, like, looking at young people in South Africa, because it's a lot of the Christianity, and I was trying to think about why it seems like Western nations are more like guarded in themselves, whereas in South Africa, if you go out onto the streets with a young person to share the gospel, they will respond to you, and they'll go deeper with you, And I was thinking, why is that? And I think because, a lot of our country, there's different role models, and there's a lot of Christians, evangelical Christians in South Africa, and it's modeled to a lot of the students. So, for example, a lot of the African students in South Africa, like, for example, in the townships, Christianity is modeled by their grandmothers. And so their grannies model it to them young, so they got a healthy respect for God. They really are. So when you encounter somebody and share the gospel, they've either heard the gospel or they've, maybe they haven't responded or they just don't know how. That's kind of like the general overview of the young people in South Africa and Africa. And as you go up into sub-Saharan Africa, like southern countries, it becomes even more respectful, because other African countries that I've been to see South Africa as the America of the world, or of Africa. So they see us as more of a liberal society. So, and I'm thinking our students are pretty good. Meantime, I'm thinking like the kids in Zambia, when they came, and I know this because they came to our conference, and they went out. I mean, we were sharing the gospel with kids. We were taking drugs, like literally. And they were fearless. They just went out and they saw the urgency, but they obviously had such a great passion for Jesus that they know what their call is. They know what the mission is, And I'd say like maybe that's one of the key differences is it was modeled to them and they know the mission. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting to think, and I haven't even really thought about it, the fact that, what are there, 52 countries on the continent of Africa? And so our country is so vast and so large that we can travel miles and miles and miles and not really have culture shock. But, in Africa where you're traveling, you can see a lot of different cultures and interact. That's pretty interesting. So from an outsider's perspective, you could preach one sermon to youth pastors in America. You could say one thing, maybe having a little bit of a different perspective. What would be your biggest piece of advice to youth pastors in America? Maybe it's regarding the culture we're facing. Maybe not. Maybe it's just cross cultural. But what would be the one piece of advice you would give to youth pastors in America?
It's easy. You got to work together. Serious. You got to come together, because the more there's infighting and separation, the more the youth. I mean, we were talking just now about the epidemic of drugs, fentanyl in. We were joking about West Virginia. West Virginia apparently is like
there's a West Virginia and a Virginia.
The Virginia, the hillbillies come from Virginia, And,
West Virginia.
You see, I'm just joking. I knew that.
Anybody from West Virginia, we apologize.
We love you. We love you.
But nobody's in West Virginia, so nobody's watching this video.
So that's what I'm saying. So like, the more you fight, the more you're not together, and you focused on, we call them molehills. Like the little things. I was a youth pastor. I know the pressures. People you sit in your staff meeting, and then there's a complaint about something small, and you get so irritated, and you think about that one thing, and you forget about the big picture. And so keep the main thing, and keep the big picture, and come together. And gospel advancing is the way forward. Because I know firsthand, I did it. I play it. I was in my comfort zone. I didn't want to lose those students. We had pizza evenings, we had games, fantastic programs, but the budget had to get bigger and bigger and bigger, but it wasn't sustainable. So, come together.
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah, what are some ways that we can pray for you guys in South Africa and support you even from afar? So I know since you've been here, you've been asking us to come visit and to come, and so we know that that's off the table as far as
not off the table.
Not everybody's able to do that, but that's still something that we're considering and would love to do that. But what are some ways that we can support you even from afar?
So obviously prayer fuels movements, and I know what I'm called to do in South Africa. We know that God is working amongst Africans. When I was briefly in Italy for a year, and all the African guys that I encountered, 90% of the guys were Christians. Although they might be running away from their country or they're immigrating to another country, God's using those African guys to impact European nations, because they go in and they become part of it. They're part of a church, and they're actually on fire for Jesus. They really have such a deep relationship with Jesus. But just pray that God would use Africa, South Africa, guys like us on the ground, just to mobilize young people, because by 2050, Africa is going to be the most populous continent on the planet. And so if we can mobilize, we've got this window of opportunity that there's the average age is 19. Let's mobilize them. Let's get them ready so we can see a new culture of church globally, not just in Africa, but globally. And so, just pray for us. I'm on a fundraising trip because we've got these events. We don't charge our students for these events. So when I visit with youth pastors and leaders in South Africa, I say to them, because some of our guys come from townships, some of them come from suburban areas, I don't want to charge the guys. I want the gospel's free. They need to come and be equipped for free. And they get bags, they get pens and all that type of stuff, and food and transport. So I'm here fundraising. So I don't know if I can say it on this podcast, but if you feel led to supporting Go Live There, look us up on our website, and there's a giving link for that.
Yeah, we can definitely post that.
That'll be cool.
In the comments. Yeah.
Okay.
One of the things that I've appreciated about getting to know you, Don, is just your heart, and sometimes serving in a difficult area for some of the issues that have happened, like socially in your country. So I know, if you guys know any of the history of South Africa, there was pretty severe persecution and racial division, which has not really gone away completely. And so some people that I know, like, Americans have like a stereotype of not knowing anything else about the world.
Okay.
and so when we hear about Africa, we think, okay, darker skin, and obviously you're Caucasian, like you have lighter skin.
Yes.
And so tell us about ministering to people in your country and other parts of Africa, and the challenges associated with that might even just dismiss you completely just based on the color of your skin. I think you had said that there's 6% white people in South Africa, and so you're part of that population, and it seems to be decreasing because of racism, from that regard. What are some challenges that you have, within that and some things, maybe even some testimonies that you've seen of God breaking down some of those walls of racial reconciliation within your country?
Yeah, one of the biggest things that we've seen. So one of the areas we work in is in South Africa. We've got townships. So townships are like, the best way I can describe them are slums. So people live in like a very small shack. It's just made out of plastic, wood, cardboard, sheet metal. And so that would be a remnant ultimately of apartheid. And so there's still like that, okay, these white people did this to us. And so, as I'm 47 years old, to be honest, I wasn't part of apartheid. I wasn't part of that generation. Maybe when I was about 10 years old, I saw some things when I was young. But there's still people who blame different people. And so when it comes to like me going into a township to work, the question is, do people trust me? I'm a settler, and I was part of the problem. Why do I have to listen to you? And so one of the big questions is, and it's still prevalent today, is this is your God. This is you bringing your God. I don't need this. And so I went into a church and I was doing gospel advancing training. I'm the only white guy. And so I've got these guys listening, and I can see the guys are skeptical. But you know what breaks down barriers ultimately is just the guys can see that like you're genuine, your authentic relationship with Jesus, and just speaking the same language as the guys. When you share from like Jesus' perspective on things, their hearts change. And so there was a guy there's a very divisive political party in South Africa, and they're very against what some of the white folks do in South Africa. But he had a shirt on, and by the end of it, this is the awesome thing, he realized that I wasn't an enemy. I'm just here to train and equip them as leaders to train the next generation of leaders.
Yeah.
And he took off his shirt and he said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for my attitude. I'm sorry, because he gave me a hard time in the group, like the whole time. And he would stand up and just share his view. And I'm like, okay, brother, thank you, man. But afterwards, because of the other guys also coming around, so it wasn't, everyone saw like, okay, this he's our friend. So that was helpful to see that God can, and in that very day, which was awesome to see. So I just think we face challenges wherever we go, but it's how we navigate those challenges. So we can give up and just say, hey, I can't do this, or we invest in leaders who can actually go into those areas. So we've got part of Go Live There. We've got a couple that works in townships. So that's our strategy for that. And so they go into, they live there, and they do some good work among the teens, because they get the culture. So even in South Africa, for most people who don't know South Africa, there's 11 different languages. There's 4 different race groups in South Africa. And so those are the challenges. And within those race groups, there's different cultures and different tribes. And so you've got to be culturally sensitive to everyone, and also got to know where you're going to work. Yeah. So for example, some places I can't just go into. It's very dangerous. So you got to know where you go. You got to be wise.
So. What I know, and we talked about this in a past episode, is one thing that we've learned with even just getting and reaching new students in our own ministries here. It's really effective way to connect them with other like-minded or interest. So when we have a new student, we ask them, okay, what are you into? Like, okay, I'm into video games, or I play this sport, or whatever. And instead of just connecting them with someone that might go to a school, but to connect them with something that has the same interest, so they can kind of have something to talk about. And so I know you're talking about, you've shared this with me too, that like you've seen the effectiveness of literally raising up indigenous people to reach their own people. Yeah. And how effective that can be, because they understand the cultural differences and the interests that they have, and they can talk the same kind of lingo and language, and so share a little bit more about that as far as your effort to really equip teenagers to reach other teenagers when it comes to their own type of people group.
Again, we talk about South Africa, but even like living in Italy for a year, we learned a lot as a family. So we really felt God saying He wants to see gospel advancing happening in Europe as well. And so during the time that I started Go Live There, like in 2015, a friend of mine, his name's Stefano, we worked together in launching gospel advancing in his area, in his town. And so as we started doing that side by side, like every year I just go back and help him, and and see the differences with the Italian youth and how they handle gospel advancing on the streets of Italy, and seeing how they also looking at their culture from a different perspective. I can tell you the very first time we trained the young people, we were so pumped and we were amped, and they got on the bus, and like these teenagers are going to win Italy for Jesus. Do you know what's the first thing all the girls did? Is they ran into the coffee shop, and they wouldn't come out and share the gospel. So it was a very big challenge. But to be honest, it was a cultural thing, because for them it's unheard of. I know they talk a lot and they always with their friends, but when it comes to this sort of stuff, they really felt like this is not part of their culture. To be honest with you, this is not what they do. Although they were being trained and we were amped, we had to learn that it's actually going to take more time with Italian folks. And so, my friend went in and encouraged them. And, if I look back now and I see where those girls have come from to now, some of them are teachers and they're sharing the gospel. Like this was like 4 or 5 years ago. And now they've come a long way, but it just takes a little bit longer with certain nations and that type of thing because of culture. We don't realize how big culture plays in certain things when it comes to the gospel. So that's one thing I had to learn when I was in Italy, but also realizing, Keith and Ryne, training up the next generation of leaders. Like we got Faith and Linda who go into the townships. They understand the culture. They really do. They understand how the African guys dance, how they, what they like and that sort of thing. It's like me taking you guys, which in 2025, when you guys come on a mission trip to South Africa, and on your vision trip, and you see a township, and I say, okay, just run a program. Let's see. And then you bring, what's that game upstairs?
Gaga ball.
Gaga ball. I've learned about Gaga
he
ball.
never heard of Gaga ball until he came.
But to be honest, now that I say it, I think it'll work pretty well.
Yeah.
in the township.
Yeah.
But it's that sort of thing. Like it just helps. I don't want the gospel to be a hindrance. So if there's guys who understand the culture, who get it, it's like my friend in Italy. He's an Italian. He knows it. Just equip those guys to give them the tools and equip them to go out and do the work. So that's been a key for us as a movement going forward.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any other questions that you have, Ryne?
So many, but I don't know if I could ask all of them. But no, I just want to say it's really, really encouraging to hear what's going on there. I think a lot of the studies and research that I've seen is that the continent of Africa is kind of the epicenter for the gospel now. It has since shifted from America and it's kind of into the continent of Africa. And so hearing your stories and your experience is really cool to see that, and it's encouraging. And then I think also one of the things that Keith has challenged me is to go back and look at missionaries and study what they've done. And so to see the work that Livingston did hundreds of years ago now playing out in the life of the people that you're working with in Africa, and the legacy that he left behind with the gospel is just really, really encouraging and challenging to me as well. But it's cool to see that the people that you're working with, the students that we're working with, one day when we're at the marriage supper of the Lamb and we see every tribe, nation, and tongue, just really, really cool to have that different perspective. So I appreciate what you had to say. Absolutely.
Thank you, Ron.
Absolutely. Well, that's all the time we have for today for this episode. If you are watching this on social media or YouTube or listening to this on podcast, we'd love for you to share this content with other people. It always helps to impact even more people. If you've benefited from this, please share it and like and comment so that the algorithm blasts it out to more people. And so we want to thank you guys so much for tuning in today.